My first surfboard was in about 1956, and it was made by Dale Velzy. It was about 6 feet 6 inches long. My dad bought it someplace down around Hermosa, Torrance Beach area, and he brought it home, and it was a balsa board, but on the bottom it had the ugliest pink and white pigment job. So for the 3 years that I had it until I moved to Newport, every time I'd take that board out in the water and people would see it, they'd kind of laugh and kind of chuckle at this guy that had this ugly surfboard. But it was the board I learned to surf on. And of course, it was great, because he had made it for a small child. And at that point, I was relatively young. So, yeah, the Dale Velzy put the pink and white on there when he made the board. I assumed that he may have made the board for maybe it was a young girl. It was definitely made for a child, a small person. And that's the reason that it had pink and white. But for me personally, when I saw it, when my dad came home, I saw the balsa on the top and I was so excited, saw the Velzy sticker. It was cool. And the next thing I know, we kind of turn it over and here's this pink and white pigment job that I had trouble dealing with for a number of years, actually. That leads to another story, which was once we had moved to Newport in '59, one of my first surfing experiences over at the pier consisted of going out in the water and surfing and then coming in, and it was in the fall, so it was cold. And if you recall, people would throw tires or whatever they could in the concrete rings so that you could stay warm. And Spud Bing, who I had gone over to Newport with from Corona del Mar that day, we went to go buy a candy bar or a drink or something, and we come back, and there is my Velzy with the pink and white paint job on the bottom in the fire pit on fire with the flames coming out. And the only good aspect of that was it was tough watching that board burn up. But the good aspect was that I was older then, 13, and I think I got a Quig, a board from Joe Quig after that, which of course was a step up as far as having surfing, a good stick. So the story turned out okay in the end. I started surfing in around '56, and it was on with my brother. And it was done on rafts at first, trying to stand up on rafts. I had seen people surfing at Haggerty's and at Malibu, down along Hermosa, Torrance Beach areas. And so what happened was there was an older gentleman, probably in his 50s now that I think about, had a sailboat off of the Portuguese Bend Club. And he would paddle out on an old, one of the plywood paddle boards with the little hole to drain the water. And one day I asked him if I could just use it. And he said, and the waves were maybe a foot at the most. And he said, sure. And so I paddled out, crashed, wiped out a number of times. But that was the very first time. And it's just a joy. One of the joys of surfing is being in the water, of course. And that set the hook right there. Well, I think what made 22nd Street special for me is that that's where all the surfers were. And when I moved to Newport, having surfed for 3 years, that's the only thing that I was concerned about. 13, you're an adolescent. You need an initiatory process to go through. And surfing was that. And the people that hung out at the pier, whether they came from other areas and then went back or whatever it was, it provided that. And one of the great things about 22nd Street was, besides the surfers, was that the only people that you saw there were people that loved the ocean as well. The dory fishermen, the old guys leaning off the rails on the pier while you were in the water, casting. The only people you saw hanging around there were surfers or other people that loved the ocean. In the summer, of course, there'd be crowds. But 22nd Street, to me, was the camaraderie, the brotherhood of, and we talked about this before, you know, the costume of the white Penny's t-shirt with the pocket, the Sperry topsiders, the blue nylon jacket. That was all a part of that aspect. So think of most of the people that were surfing at that time in that area. Most of them were either going through adolescence like myself, or they had already gone through it and they were in the 18, 19 mode, but still quite young. The Rendezvous Ballroom, Dick Dale, the partying, having a couple of you know, country club malt liquors, and then kind of walking around in the days of these older people. I think of them as a rambunctious crowd, surfers, and in fact they're known, I think, along the coastline, and a lot of the hysteria that came from the general public about surfers were because they didn't have any trouble experimenting with you know, with life and all the aspects of life. So that's yeah. You know, I've told people that when I first started surfing in '56, that you would go places to go surfing, and you had to call people up on the phone because of my parents didn't want me to go surfing by myself. So when it comes to having a lot of people out in the water, there were people all along the coastline in very small groups. But all along the coastline. I mean, even up into Santa Cruz, I'm sure there were probably people up there as well. Farther north than that, I don't believe at that time there was. But all along the coast from, say, Santa Cruz all the way down to San Diego, there were these little groups, these little cliques of surfers in the adolescent to 18, 19 years old range. And there were not a lot of people surfing at that time. The waves were not crowded. You didn't have to worry about paddling out in a different zone and having people becoming upset. There was simply the respect of paddling out and waiting your turn. That's what I noticed through the first part, say up until 60, 61. Then it started to get a little more serious, a little more, we don't want you, you know, if you're from Newport, we don't want you down here, and we don't want you up there, and if you're from Malibu, you know, it got a little more cliquey, okay, and a little more serious. And of course, then the growth was mixed in from all the people from the Gidget movies and the endless line. I don't know if people realize how many surfing films were made at that time. Bud Brown, Bruce Brown, I mean, and Grant Roloff. I mean, there were just Severson. There were people making a lot of films in the late 50s, early 60s. And they were all showing inland as well. So you'd have people from inland coming down to the beach with their surfboards. I think that's when it really took off, in my mind, would be 61, 62, where it actually became a fad for people to go surfing even once or twice a year. Thinking, and then putting the gear on. And you know, a funny thing in Newport, and this had to be again in 62, 63, you would actually see cars coming down to the Newport Pier with surfboards sticking out of the trunk, but there were no boards inside the car. They were just the tail block sections, so that people would think it was guys coming down to hook up with girls or whatever it might be. And they would cruise that 22nd Street parking lot with these hot rods, with these surfboards just sticking out the tail of the trunk. So that kind of gives you an idea of how people thought they wanted to be involved with surfing, with the image of it. I did a lot of skateboarding. And it was metal skates, and it was done on a skateboard that was maybe 16 inches long, 4 inches wide, and you'd split the metal skate that you'd get from your sister, in my case. And this good friend of mine, Spud Bing, and I made these little skateboards, and That's really more than anything in the world. My style of surfing came from running hundreds of miles of sidewalks on a skateboard, going up, going along, clickety click, clickety click, clickety click, and then going up, like you're doing a bottom turn, going up onto a 3 or 4 foot driveway, and then cutting back, then coming down, and then you would come down to where, you know, in California, so many people have you have the curb, and then you have gravel, not necessarily grass, but gravel right on that section. And so you'd go up, and then you would come down, and then you would ride like you were going to walk on the nose, but you never moved your feet because they were just fit on the skateboard. And then you would run along on that curb that's 6 inches wide, and then you'd make that, and then you'd just go clickety click, and then go up and go down, and then you'd run back, and everything would be backside. So that when the waves did come up, you were right there. Your balance was right there. As long as you knew and gathered the information on what the ocean was going to do, what the waves were going to do, the balance was there. So it was skateboarding for myself, to keep myself ready for when the waves did come. Yeah.
This is perfect because we have lots.
Back in the 20s, 30s, because the first surfing club that I'm aware of in California was the Corona del Mar Surf Club, and that was before the jetties even. There was a break out there that when the surf got quite large on those south swells, that those guys would come down from all over the coast to ride that particular break. So the Newport area was well known, I believe, for surfing for a long time. Well, Duke came over. My understanding was that Duke Kahanamoku came over, and he was a member of, I thought, an honorary member of the Corona del Mar Surf Club. So. And when I say Corona del Mar, I mean Newport too, because I think of it as the same place, really. But 22nd Street, boy, the waves there were so nice. Little crisp, dark, that wonderful water in the wintertime, that dark blue.
What was a typical winter day like? I mean, did you surf prior to school?
Yeah. And it was short. I mean, by the time we rode our bikes over there and took the ferry across, that's how I got from like 59 to 63. That's how I got over to Newport, was on a bicycle. And then you would come down, ride down onto Balboa Island, take the ferry across. And then you were basically right there at the pier area. We'd try and go before school. You'd try and go after school. Things really improved in that regard when I started at Harbor High School, a sophomore and a freshman, sophomore year, because I was a little more competent at surfing than most of my peers in my same age group. And so the older surfers would let me ride in their car, I think of Roger Ratt. I did a lot of riding around with Roger Ratt. And in those days it was cool because you'd kind of hitchhike, and Roger knew where you were going to be, and he'd kind of pick you up, and then he'd go, oh, I need a quarter, so you'd give him a quarter, and gas was a quarter, so you bought the guy a gallon of gas, and he would give you a ride over to Newport. So, and it wasn't just Roger, there were others too. I think Mike Marshall, I recall getting some rides with him as well, or even Greg McGilvery was older at that time. So I always felt lucky. Actually, I felt really lucky that I was able to learn how to surf competently, because I felt that I got a free ride when I was a very young man, because I got respect, and I didn't get tested like a lot of young men get tested. Do you know what I mean? And I never felt that I got really tested because I was competent at surfing and I fit into this group in such a way that I was very secure. I always felt blessed that I had that. And we actually tried to provide that for our own son. Yeah, surfing was very territorial, and I have to say that if people did not abide by the code, if you didn't understand how to surf and you went out in the water and you started dropping in on people, then you were going to have a really bad experience. And in those days, that experience would include people just basically running over you with their surfboard. I remember a few times, not at Newport, but I remember a time at Rincon actually taking a guy out because he had dropped in on me 3 times in a row. And I kept waiting. Like I said previously, in surfing, you go out in the water, you paddle out beyond everyone that's there, and you wait for all the people that you've paddled past to catch a wave. And once they've done that, then it's your turn. And that's the way it works. It's a very simple premise. But there were people that were not through malice, but were ignorant of that fact. And they would come out in the water and just start dropping in on you no matter what. You could have a conversation with them about, you need to do this. Sometimes they wouldn't pay attention. And at Newport and any other place that I ever went along the coastline, the good surfers would take people out. I mean, they would just come down and just do a bottom turn and just smash right into their legs. I'm sure they didn't break their legs, but I'm sure it felt like that to the person sometimes. And that would happen just about anywhere you went, especially if the waves were really good. See, on Friday and Saturday nights, there were always parties, and or you'd go to the Rendezvous and listen to Dick Dale. That was a big time for Dick Dale. He was hot. A lot of people would come down to the Rendezvous. The ballroom was just overflowing with people. And while it wasn't wise to partake, I'd have to say that most of the people that I knew were partaking. There was underage drinking. There wasn't anything else that I was ever aware of besides the drinking. And I have to say, I think at that point, it was quite modest. Being young and having 2 or 3 little cans of country club malt liquor and then kind of getting a headache and going to Denny's, and hanging out as a group until 12:30 or something, 1 o'clock in the morning. But there were parties every Friday night and every Saturday night from when I moved to Newport in 1959, and that was in the 8th grade, all the way through, graduating from high school. And then there were parties after that, of course, that were with people that you knew. That area, Newport, and I have to say, I think a lot of that comes from the generation that we come from, because they went through the war, and when that war was over, they knew how to party, and a lot of those people, still to this day, the ones that are still alive, they partied hardy, and there was a reason for that. It was a great celebration going on for them in their own lives, because there was so much fear. Newport, of course, got now bringing that up, of course, that was a pretty dramatic moment in our lives too. For my generation, was Vietnam, and particularly when I say that, I'm talking about going to Trestle and having a Marine lieutenant put a 45 to your head, because he's all messed up because he was sent to Vietnam. And they would put these people on surfer patrol down there. And so you'd bust in and drive here or walk down from Sacramento or whatever. And these poor young men were all messed up from going over to Vietnam and coming back. And so, yeah, there was a lot of partying going on and a lot of fear. This would be more in the 63, 4, 5 range, of course, and then moving on through to when I was getting older and getting draft cards and stuff like that. In fact, most of the people that I was aware of when we moved to Hawaii, in 1967, there were a lot of people over there that were in the National Guard and stuff, because you could surf and be in the National Guard. And that was the way that people were trying to deal with that kind of a thing. One party that I remember in Newport was the house was destroyed. I mean, it was just basically trash. There was probably 50 or 60 people there. It was a girl's house, and everybody kind of went crazy and tore this house apart. And I remember leaving the party and saying to myself, gosh, you know, this is really crazy. And I'm sure that when her parents got home, that they were not happy to see what had transpired there. But yeah, there was, you know, it's youth, it's adolescence, and it's alcohol, and there was a lot of partying and people driving. I think there's a lot of us that feel very fortunate to be alive. You know, I just kind of like to leave it at that. You know, I certainly feel blessed to be here, and I rolled the dice a number of times, and I just feel fortunate that you know, I didn't have to pay the price like so many other people have. And the thing about Vietnam was it was so personal, and it was personal in my life because I'd go surfing on a Marine base, and you'd get confronted and have your board taken away, or like I said, one time I actually had a guy put a gun to my head, like he was going to shoot me because he asked me to stop, and I just kept walking. I was going to go out in the water because I didn't feel like there was anything that anybody could really do. I mean, come on, you're 16, 17 years old, you're an American. Yeah, okay, I broke onto the military base, but I'm out here surfing waves. I mean, it's pretty obvious I'm not a spy from Vietnam, and but it was a hard time there. I do have a great story. I don't know if you want it, but I'll lay it on you. A friend of mine, Mike Horn, and I went one time. We drove down and we drove over the freeway overpass. I had a Volkswagen bus. We drove over the freeway overpass onto the Marine base, and when we were parked back in the jungle, and when we were walking back, you know, to the waves, there was a whole platoon of Marines practicing some kind of jungle maneuvers, and they took our surfboards. And about a week later, we were supposed to go down with notes from our parents to get our surfboards back from the MP headquarters impound. This is back in a number of miles back in on the base. So we go down. Mike Horn and I drove down. We show the note to the guy to let us on the base, and we drive in, and we see our surfboards in this fenced-in area. So Mike and I thought it would be fun if we just stole our surfboards back from the Marine base. So what we did was it was my Volkswagen bus, and we backed it in right next to the fence. And we're less than 100 feet away from the Marine MP station with two Marines sitting on the porch, kind of in rocking chairs, rocking around. And so we backed my Volkswagen bus in, opened the side door, Mike held up the fence, I crawled up underneath, I pulled his board out and my board out, we put the boards in my Volkswagen bus, and we drove off the base, you know. And we were so pleased that we had managed to get our surfboards back, you know. There were good times with the Marines too. Sometimes they would come down, they have these little ammo cars. It's like a little, like these little ATV vehicles that you see people running around on, but it has a flatbed on it where they can put ammo on it, and they can bring the bullets and the munitions and stuff to the troops out in the field. You'd be out in the water, and you'd see them come flying up the beach, you know, and they'd come flying up the beach, and then they'd get off and they'd walk out in the water on the rocks, and they'd go like this, you know, come in, come in. And there'd be like 6 or 7 guys in the water, and they'd be going, you know, hey, okay, yeah. And there were these great confrontations a number of times where one time there was actually a Marine that was so upset that we didn't come in that he swam out. He took his gun belt off, and he puts it down on the beach, and he's out in the water. Now imagine this. You've got 6 or 7 guys on surfboards, on long boards, where you just go and you're 50 feet over here. And this man is swimming after you, trying to get you, which of course, if he would have gotten us, we would have been in big trouble. Now, you have to remember the time frame here. No disrespect to meant, but we're talking about kids that are 15, 16, 17 years old, adolescents, and they're on surfboards, and this guy's going, come on in, and it just didn't work out, you know. So there were some fun times down there too. What I do remember, and this refers to the surfing persona, the negative persona that people had about surfers. A lot of that had to deal with some of the stickers and things, because there were iron crosses and insignias that surfers used that I guess the older generation equated with the war. And so because of that, and also because a lot of the partying and some of the damage that was done, there was this negative persona about surfers that I felt all the time, except from your peers, your fellow surfers. I mean, that's where the camaraderie comes from. Of course, if you feel ostracized by a society, then you take your strength comes from the group that you feel a part of. And one of the most negative things that I encountered was at Harbor High School, and I can't remember which year it was. It would have to have been my freshman year or my sophomore year, but either my dad or my mom had mentioned, you know, you're a good swimmer now, and maybe you should go out for the swim team. And I wanted to make them happy, and plus I thought it would be interesting, and I was kind of interested in water polo. So I went to the coach, and I asked him if I could go out for the swim team. And he said, well, you're a freshman, sophomore. Only tryout that I can put you in right now would be with the varsity team. And I said, that's fine. I'll swim against them, and then you can see, you know, if I'm any good or not. Well, it was a great session, and I had times that were either better or equivalent to everyone on his varsity team. And I know a couple of those people went on and were in Olympic trials, and even one person went on to be in the Olympics. And after that tryout, and I remember my head felt like a basketball. I had put so much effort into it. I was in the showers with my head against the wall, just going, wow, that was really intense. I wasn't used to that kind of swimming. All the swimming I had done had been in the ocean, which of course puts you in pretty good shape. But the coach came in, and he said, that was great. You know, I'd really like to have you on the team. I see some really great potential, but you need to give up surfing. And I was crushed because that's stupid. And it was a bias, a negative bias, and I found out, you know, years later that he'd been a lifeguard in the summers someplace, and he'd had some negative experience with surfers, but that is not what a coach or a mentor would ever do. And that always bothered me, because I felt that I had some potential there. I wanted to do it, but I was ostracized because I was a surfer. I mean, it was the surfing that gave me the ability, you know, to beat most of the people on his team. So it just never made any sense to me, and always bothered me, you know.
So did you tell that coach that I don't want to be on your swim team?
I did tell the coach that. When he said that you need to give up surfing, I said, I'll see you later. I'm not giving up surfing. Surfing is what made me what I am. There's, I don't know how this, I do remember going through Laguna with Roger the Rat, driving down to Doheny, I believe. And on the way home, there was a gentleman in Laguna called the Greeter. And he would just sit on the street corners and greet everyone that came by. Wonderful chap. He was probably 70 years old back then. But we're driving through, and I remember one time Roger or someone in the car said that we needed to moon the greeter. So we did. And I'll never forget that guy's face as we drove by the greeter with our moons showing. His expression, he was not happy. Okay. The greeter was very unhappy that day.